Special Economic Service SES meeting conducted by the Committee on Appropriation and Adjudication will come to order, and I will reconvene from the second SES held on February the 13th, 2018. The courtesy notice of this meeting was disseminated to all local media outlets via electronic format. Notice of the hearing or this meeting was also made known on the Guam Legislature's website. I want to thank everybody for coming this morning. We have a few things on the agenda, and I guess I'll wait until the end for my own statement. But we did send out an agenda to everybody, so in recognition of the fact that we did, I will stick to the agenda, and then I may have a closing statement. Okay. I got on both radio stations this morning. They were asking, what were you going to do this morning? I said, I'll just find out how things are going. So I guess the month is closed out. Do you guys have any idea how we did last month? And I'll let you and Lester and Mr. Burns both speak to where we are with the appropriations and collections and.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We did transmit the February CRER, and it is part of the agenda for today. The latest report that we've submitted is that as far as closing out of the month, we normally don't get from the BBMR side any information from DOA, for at least a couple of days after the closing of the month for them to provide their preliminary reports to us. So I don't have anything other than the February CRER and February Special Funds report available at this time.
I figured that, but I was just wondering, we don't know what the bank account looks like, though I've been told by OFB that you guys actually know almost on a daily basis what the running balance is in the account. So I'm just wondering how are we doing financially?
Mr. Speaker, as Lester says, as far as expenses are concerned, we're still closing the books. As far as income was concerned, March is not one of the best months that we expect, and we came in roughly within 5% of where we expected to be.
With what you were able to collect in revenue, how much of the outstanding vendor payables, that 41 million really boggled my mind the last time I heard it and it's stuck in my mind. How much of that were you able to pay down?
Currently we're about 34 million. So we reduced it by about 7 to 8 million.
I thought that would be a lot smaller because I thought that I was hoping that most of that was actually the amounts that were owed to the health insurance companies, and that if they were made at least not current but brought up a few more months from November, that they would that would have brought down that number. But that we still have a $34 million vendor payable.
Yes, sir. We have made some progress, especially with the health premiums for retired employees. The smaller ones we've begun to pay down and are much more current. The large ones we're still moving through. There was a large amount outstanding at when I took office, and we have spoken with them all, and we've kind of agreed a plan to how to disperse the amounts to them that's equitable to all of them.
Okay.
And may I add, sir, that it's my understanding that there was a revised, or there's a payment plan as opposed to a net payment to have exhausted any of the outstanding amounts. So therein maybe is why the amount is still in that range as opposed to significantly less, because they graciously accepted the government's proposal for a payment plan.
Okay, great. As all of you know, yesterday I did have a public hearing on an increase in the property tax and an increase in the sin taxes. I didn't get beat up as badly as I thought I would, but I am trying to hold up my end of the deal with the governor, that I would try to find additional sources of revenue to try to replace the increase in the BPT or the sales tax that we passed, one of the two. But I'm still getting from the testimony the fact that the opposition to any increase in taxes, the major opposition is, why should we increase the tax when we're not collecting it? And so on the part of the enforcement, what's the administration doing to assist Revenue and Taxation to beef up their enforcement and to beef up their preparation of regulations for the bed and breakfast one? Yesterday, Senator Mike even was suggesting that he'll be moving to have the due date on the sin tax on cigarettes put off a whole year so that he could see whether or not the tax stamp really does bring in additional revenue on its own, because there was leakage that wasn't being collected. The bars came in and said that we're not going out and helping. We're not doing any regulation out there or checking on the bars to see whether or not the sales are going to. Just turn Teresa's over to you if you want to talk to Marie. But those, and the reason why I'm saying the entire administration, because I recognize, or the legislature recognizes, the importance of that department. We gave them additional people to try to help them out. If you guys can't send people from BBMR or BSP or wherever in the executive to help them, and they don't collect money, it all affects the rest of us. So if we could all just send all the brains that's behind you to assist them to do whatever it is that they need to do to write the regulations, I think we'd be further ahead. I just don't know, but.
Mr. Speaker, we do aggressively collect, and all these meetings that we have, we do aggressively collect on the receivables. On those positions that you're talking about, that we got 30, we are moving on those positions. We're trying to get them from DOA over to the Department of Revenue and Taxation with this, budget of the 67 million. There was a delay on these things, but fortunately, those positions now we're pursuing, and hopefully we can get those from DOA to enforce our collection revenue officers. We're looking at 10 of them that we're going to try to recruit. I know it's something that we looked at, but as far as collection, we've been doing a lot of collections. We're going to try and get those 10 revenue officers in as soon as possible. As far as the stamped tobacco, we are meeting with the stakeholders on April 10 to address this machine and all these responsibilities that we'll be moving forward on the stamped tobacco. But this time tobacco is really just a control system. I mean, it doesn't really bring in any additional revenue. I mean, we still control the tobacco. I mean, we still have, you know, the tobacco bandit warehouse that we have and all these things. But, you know, it's something that we're working. And the other one that you talk about is the short-term vacation homes. We had the hearing on that one. So hopefully, if that bill passes, we'll try and move forward with. We're ready to actually license those short-term vacation homes. We're prepared and waiting for the bill to pass. So we're doing our very best, and hopefully we can get more additional people in. We do have a lot of other stuff, other revenue enhancements that we do. For example, audit. We do a lot of audits. I mean, we talk about EITC. We even audit more EITC taxpayers than the IRS does. So there's a lot of things that we do that we bring in the revenues, and it's just a matter of time. And I just want to, make it clear that we are doing our very best. We meet every week with the revenue officers, on these issues. So, it's just, it just takes time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect to Department of Revenue and Taxation, the biggest challenge that they face is they continue to be a manual operation. We have 2 audits ongoing right now. One is on tobacco tax, and there are significant control lapses there and that are occurring. And this is where taxes are supposed to be taken up front, but the bonded warehouse, there's no reconciliation, and all, between what is brought in, what is brought out. And so again, it's purely self-reliance there. Likewise, in the real property tax audit that we're doing right now, we see the significant amount of accounts receivable. Let me just say for the record that those accounts receivable that are on the books of Department of Revenue and Taxation is not on the books of Department of Administration. Okay, that's their books, okay, because that's their subsidiary ledgers. Okay, the control that's recorded on a Department of Administration at year end is strictly the actual collections that come in 90 days thereafter, and that's it. So part of their challenge is a manual operation. We're also doing an audit right now, and unfortunately we've got 3 audits going on there, and I feel sorry for their people, okay. An audit on gaming tax. Again, as I reported, they were behind almost a year in the posting of the manual returns to even know who did file, who did pay. So that's the challenge that they face, that it is primarily a manual operation, and more people are being spent inputting as opposed to analyzing.
Guys, I purposely wore this shirt not because I wanted to be the brightest person in the room, but it's, besides Autism Month, I'm blue, but Team Guam. We need to work together, and we need to get to the 21st century. I know I don't know how to use this thing. It's called a smartphone. Unfortunately, the owner isn't very smart. So I have to go into the other office, and I have one of my staffers tell me how to do it. We've got to admit that we're not up to date. Whether or not you take OTEC and situate them up there with you guys to bring you into the 21st century, or BBMR and BSP lends you people like I have in my OFB and in my office staff to help me work with a smartphone in the 21st. You guys got to do something, because if what the auditor is saying comes out before I bring the bills to the floor, I'm afraid that neither one of them is going to pass, because the argument is going to be, don't increase the tax until you get collections.
If I may add, Mr. Speaker, on the accounts receivable, I'd also like to add that not all of that is collectible right now. Some of those are bankruptcies, litigation, payment arrangements. So those are monies that you're not going to see immediately. Even if we do go out and collect, we're doing what we can, and we will continue to do that. But also I'd like to add that we're also we're also in the process of hiring compliance inspectors, and they will go out and look and regulate this tobacco. We're currently working on the rules and regs for the Stamp Tax Act. So these are all things that are ongoing. What they don't see what's going on behind closed doors, behind the doors, and they think that these are monies that are going to be realized immediately. They are not, and that's why we still need all the increase in tax, if possible, because those monies aren't going to be realized immediately.
All that's going to be is it's going to be an increase in the amount to be collected as opposed to the amount collected.
And again, we are, with 10 new revenue officers, new compliance inspectors, we are going to be out there and enforcing and doing everything we can to collect.
Do I dare ask when your reports are coming out?
I was just going to say, I'm not at liberty to speak on the preliminary numbers for, our reports, I don't want to give you a time frame at this point, because to say when they're coming out.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, one of the things that you brought about technology, I was here 3 times on a public hearing to push for the mandatory e-filing of the BPT. Oh, yes. We spent a lot of times, and you know, I've been here 3 times pushing for that mandatory filing of the BPT. So that's something that maybe we can require, you know, the taxpayers of Guam to file electronically rather than have my people process it, spend hours and hours processing those returns.
Yes, that is definitely, I remember saying it from the get-go, we do need mandatory electronic filing, because I could remember them when they were behind 2 years. So that is essential, and maybe to get people ready to do this, we need to implement it by October 1. The challenge, though, that I hear from most people who want to file electronically is the payment. You know, because how do you make a payment online unless you have a credit card? And of course, we went down that road a few years ago when credit card, you know, GovGuam was being charged, you know, was paying on average over $4 million a year just on credit card fees. So the question, though, is, you know, maybe you can have a limit on how much you can accept, because a customer, you know, like AK says, the maximum we'll take is $10,000 or $20,000. You know, so maybe there can be a limit as to how much. But I think, you know, like to get faster payment and to incentivize people, you know, there is going to be a cost for that. But that was one of the challenges, is when you file online, and for small vendors, especially if, you know, they only have to pay $100, you file online, you still have to go into Treasury of Guam to make that payment. You know, so that's another issue, is do we want to absorb the costs of the credit card fee, which went to a high of $4 million, or do we want to kind of cap it? But again, that's a matter of negotiation and the part of the Department of Administration working with Revenue and Taxation. But that's what businesses say. I don't mind filing electronically, but then I have to go and come in and pay to the Treasury of Guam with my return. So what different, you know, I might as well just do it all at one time. You know.
Well, maybe we'll have to do a cost-benefit analysis to try to determine whether or not the $4 million POS is worth getting the $600 million in payments. It would seem to me that we may have been penny wise and pound foolish in stopping it, when this may be that may be a discussion amongst you guys. I mean, I'm not the accountant here. So amongst you, whether or not there is, I mean, because I pay cash, but that's because of my age. I know, I'm shocked at how people go in and will charge, and the coffee shop will accept a debit card or a credit card for a $3 or $4 coffee, and I'm like, you know, how is that? How are they making it with that and paying that fee to collect that $3, or is it worth the $3? I mean, collecting the $3 and realizing that they're going to have to be paying 10 or 15 cents for that transaction, but at least they got that person to come in, because otherwise that person wouldn't have come in if they had to wait for cash.
Electronic filing should not just be limited to BPT. It should be for everything. Everything from driver's license to car registration to real property taxes, all of that. And this is kind of like where, again, the absorption of the fee, you know, I have to wait I come in now to, you know, to Treasurer of Guam just to pay, but this is where we, you know, we are a billion-dollar corporation, okay? And we are still back in the 20th century with inputting things, you know, individual income tax is, you know, sometimes last year the money was ahead of the returns. Now the returns are ahead of the money because of the fact that they've been manually inputting everything into the system. So this is, you know, we have to be not penny wise and pound foolish, but we need to make significant investments in DRT as well as Department of Administration. So the two of them will talk together, because right now they don't talk to each other.
Your computers don't talk to each other. I've been screaming about that for 10 years now. So
I apologize. I meant the computers don't talk to each other.
I apologize.
Their computers are silos, okay? But they do talk to each other, but their computers are silos. I apologize.
We do talk to each other, and we actually have started a series of discussions around this very subject of better identifying tax capture. We've had one meeting because we've just started this process, but we intend to continue to make these arrangements for further meetings to try and arrive at some conclusion. And so you may be right that it is better to pay $4 million in order to collect $600 million, and we'll take a look at that.
Okay. My vice chair had a question. He's been trying to grab the microphone for since he sat down, and then the legislative secretary has a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Just a follow-up with regards to the numbers that are coming in. I know, Mr. Burns, you mentioned that it's within 5% of expected revenues to be generated in the month of March. What's your approximate number of actual collections in March?
It's around about 36 million in March.
36 million. Yeah. So approximately $36 million. Okay, and then looking at or listening intently to some of the comments and Mr. Camacho, we certainly recognize that your agency is in need of personnel, and just listening to your comments, I sense that there's an ongoing recruitment for new personnel, for compliance inspectors, for the 10 additional personnel, but then again, there's a tool that even the speaker and the chairman alluded to, that there's a mechanism already in place where you can take personnel from other GovGuam agencies, reassign them so that in fact they can be cross-trained and carry out the tax collection responsibilities and the compliance inspector. We understand that there's a requirement for specific certification and specific training, but rather than going out and actually recruiting additional personnel, you already have the reorganization proposal within law that allows the governor to be able to take personnel government-wide and reassign them so that in fact they can provide support where support is needed. So I'm trying to understand that, because let me transition to another area, which is the Guam Fire Department. There's ongoing recruitment, rightfully so. We know the firefighters need additional reinforcements. We know they need additional personnel. Now, they're recruiting for firefighters, and in your case, you're recruiting for compliance inspectors and tax collectors. So is the cash flowing in today that we're back to normal operations? Because that's the sense I'm getting. With the firefighters, recruiting 45 firefighters, my question would be, is it possible to phase in that recruitment process? Rather than recruiting 45 up front, perhaps 25, and then the additional 20 within a few months after that going into the next fiscal year, so that at least you spread the cost over this fiscal year and also going into the next FY. So, I mean, these are the questions that I have in light of the continual statement that, look, we need cash, the government needs cash, and we recognize that. But in the same token, I'm getting a sense now, Mr. Chairman, that everything is back to normal, and we're back to normal operations of the government of Guam, going out and recruiting for positions rather than using the tool that is already in law that allows the governor to be able to reassign personnel and to reorganize this government.
Yes, I appreciate that, Senator. Thank you. But here's where we're at. We were supposed to hire 36 positions. That's where we're sacrificing. We're hiring absolute necessary critical positions. The other positions that you're talking about, we could use them in every other branch. So we're short a business license, we're short at insurance, we're short at motor carrier, driver's DMV. They're in every area that we need manpower. Right now we're focusing on the critical side that we need today. So all those other resources that you're talking about, we can use them in all the other branches.
But isn't your branch very critical in terms of tax collections?
Absolutely.
And enforcement? So
Yes.
I mean, that's where even the governor made a statement with regards to reorganization.
Yes.
He said, we're looking at agencies that typically work together, and we're trying to determine whether it makes sense to bring them together, whether it's in a partnership or through combining agencies. So the governor understands not only the cash situation that we're in, but we need to reorganize this government. And if it means looking at some of the services and the functions out there, reassigning them to rev and tax,
yes.
And for you, Marie, to say the other agencies need them just as much, we understand, but they're not recruiting firefighters. They're not recruiting uniformed police officers. They're not recruiting DOC officers. So in this particular case, tax collection is critical.
Yes.
And that's why there's a continuous emphasis on getting you the resources, but can we look internally in this government first? Because now the governor's got a lot of flexibility with the new reorganization proposal that's in law in terms of being able to take personnel, reassign them, and ensure that we put the resources where it's needed. And right now, it's rev and tax.
Right. We are going to hire those people and use those other people that we could within the other agencies. We need a permanent solution for collection branch. So this will be permanently placed there instead of temporary and sharing those resources. We can use those, absolutely use them in the other divisions.
In the other divisions, you're referring to rev and tax?
Yes.
Within rev and tax,
yes,
not
correct.
Within the government of Guam large?
No, rev and tax,
the entire,
correct.
Okay, then
Yes.
I stand corrected.
We will use them.
But the issue is, let's use that to the best that we can.
Yes, and
because
we are.
That tool provides so much flexibility to the governor of Guam
Yes.
to be able to make decisions where, in fact, we don't have to go out and recruit additional personnel, because that's going to increase the cost of government operations. We recognize that there are a lot of people that are retiring probably every month or closer towards the end of the fiscal year, and those resources can be redirected towards recruitment of firefighters or law enforcement personnel or educators in the classroom or healthcare professionals.
Yes.
But in this case, I would think that you would want to, or the governor would want to use the tool that is already given to him, that was recently given to him, to be able to maintain and contain the cost of government, but yet do more.
Yes, and we
do
will.
more by virtue of giving you the resources so you can collect.
Yes, thank you for that. That will give us the ability to move those people in the other divisions within rev and tax.
Okay, so if you're looking at that, when are you looking at implementing it?
Because we started out with 36, now we're looking at 16. That was our cost-cutting measure. we're not only freezing all the increments and some of the hiring processes that we were supposed to do.
So rather than recruiting or hiring 36, you're now looking at 16. Are you looking at 16 within the government of Guam family to reassign them to revenue tax?
No.
Or are you looking at
these are
recruiting new
qualified,
personnel?
yes, rated, and has been already certified or rated at DOA. And we were just waiting for that certified listing to come forward. And they put a hold on that until just recently. When, you know, of course, everybody realized we have to improve collections and work on those ARs and everybody else that's out there that's not paying tax. So we need these people that are certified, qualified for this position.
But Ms. Beleto, there's no question about whether the agency needs it. It's
Yes.
how you're going to acquire those personnel. Whether are you going to take it through the reorganization process and take individuals within the entire government of Guam, reassign them to revenue tax so that they can provide support to revenue tax, or are you going to recruit new personnel? I mean, those are the issues. So it really comes down to whether, in fact, we're back to operation or operating normally in terms of hiring personnel where we think is necessary, rather than looking internally and trying to realize some cost reductions and some savings.
I think it'll be a combination of both, Senator. We can definitely work with the fiscal team to look at other areas of the government of Guam to see if we can do the reassignment of those things. But at the same time, we are still pursuing those new positions that we got for this fiscal year. I think it's 36 positions. We're still looking at hiring those positions.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I understand that the agenda did have you making a report, Mr. Carlson. Why don't we start with that? I'm sorry that I got and then we'll recognize Senator Lee and then Senator Nelson on some other issue. But the FRP, the impact, because I think that we're segueing from what Ms. Benito mentioned, that the going from 36 to 16 is absolutely necessary. Our question to Mr. Carlson was the impact of the fiscal realignment plan on the operations of the government and how we can address that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We submitted the fiscal realignment plan, and we went ahead and provided the revision to comply with your request that net appropriations are cut by at least $30 million. And I think we have an OFB analysis that shows that that was complied with. There is a public, I assume it was sent to everybody, that basically outlines the areas and the Public Law 3442 appropriation levels, and now the levels that are contained in the fiscal realignment plan for everybody's review. The good news is that, consistent with the discussion that just took place, we did not want to cut personnel. We wanted to be able to try to maintain government services, and we were able to do that through the passage of Public Law 3487 with the BPT increase to supplement the funding that is needed to be able to balance a loss in revenue, $30 million cut in government operations, but we still needed to be able to have the inflow of cash to be able to continue to do what it is that the government needs to do and expected of the government. So the impacts were primarily in, as Reverend Tax had just explained, foregoing of the filling of vacancies and cutting in operations, reduced amounts in contracts, The details were provided a while back in the first SES, and a lot of those details were amended slightly to be able to get to a $30 million reduction. The great takeaway is that with the help of the legislature, we took what would have been a serious general fund pro rata share to public safety, police and fire, 2.5 and 2.7 respectively, a cut in their operating budget for the rest of the fiscal year. With the cost cutting and the inclusion of the BPT revenue, we were able to take those cuts down to a more manageable $800,000 and $900,000 respectively. So the impact to those agencies specifically was minimized, and that is due to a great part in being able to project the $24.6 million that we expect to collect in the rest of the fiscal year. So we don't foresee a lot of impacts. BBMR, our cuts were mainly, again, not filling 3 positions that were funded. I'm sure that there are other entities sitting here at the table that will tell you how it was that they were going to absorb the cuts, but none of that would have made any difference if we didn't have the revenue to supplement operations. So again, thank you very much.
And I don't know who prepares the reports or the press releases from some of your public safety agencies when they come out and say that the 23-day closure of Estumbo saved us $400,000 in overtime. It may have just, I won't use a more graphic, but somebody stepped on something in trying to, you know, inflate the numbers to make it, to justify the closure. And it may result in some people asking, well, if you can save $400,000 in 23 days, how much can you save in a full year? And was it really necessary? I just, those are the things that I'm trying to get from you guys. Mm-hmm. And I'm wishing that you could pull and make sure that they clear all the numbers with you and you add it up so that zeros don't get added, so that it looks good. Because then it just undermines your entire credibility. I'm also concerned about what's going to happen in education. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, they were taking a huge hit. And I really do think that, you know, though I'm proposing to increase the property tax to try to help them, that loss that they're going to suffer under the plan, how is that going to affect their classrooms? And those are the kinds of things we need to discuss as a team to determine whether or not it's absolutely necessary. But we should be more careful about the numbers that we're using, because it just really, it sounds good, but when you stop and you look at it and you go, really? Then maybe we don't need all that overtime. Maybe we can do without, and we'll finally implement the OPA's report that she's been pushing for 10 years of getting rid of that additional amount.
Yes. I would be remiss if I didn't point out, too, that our initial call to the Department of Education was in the neighborhood of $19.5 million. And so the fiscal realignment plan reduction down to 12 million, consistent with the Department of Education's priority 1 and a little bit of priority 2 cost reductions. There was some, interaction that took place to be able to come up with the numbers that were presented.
Well, no, I really want to commend the board, and because they sat down and they really went through and looked at it with their oversight chair beating them over the head to make sure that they got some savings out. But I appreciated the fact that they were honest enough that they could do without with certain things. But I just didn't want classroom instruction to be affected. And so unless anybody has any questions directly of Mr. Carlson's report, sure.
Just one question, Mr. Carlson, with regards to, thank you very much for the submission of the revised fiscal realignment plan. But of the $30 million in cuts involved, will it result in any reduced hours for the balance of the fiscal year? Reduced work hours?
With the BPT increase factored in to bring, balance, we are looking at not being able to have to entertain any of those hard decisions, but I must be very clear that I remember the speaker during the marathon session that we had to be able to get 3487 passed. He said 1% would do it, 1% would do it. So we got the 1%. So we need to keep the 1% to be able to stabilize the revenue at the same time that we're reducing our operational footprint. So as long as the 1% comes in, and as long as the 1% is not reduced or, God forbid, eliminated, we should be okay. But if it is reduced or if it is eliminated, and the same thing happens with the 2% as it comes to fruition October 1st, then we're going to be back to almost where we started, because you guys provided a solution, and again, I thank you very much. But now that we have a solution, there shouldn't be somebody with an eraser trying to take what is there and then all of a sudden say that we don't need it, because the body passed something after much deliberation that gets us to where we think we're going to be okay.
So are there any plans to rescind the notification to the personnel, the government of Guam personnel, with regards to furlough?
We're looking to try to unwind what we've been doing. You've seen the evidence of that with the fire stations and things of that nature reopening. Quite honestly, the concern is that there is one bill specifically that will undo what you guys did. So until that measure is dealt with or withdrawn by the author, there's still that cloud of uncertainty, and that uncertainty needs to be put in some kind of perspective. And so just to believe that there won't be any momentum behind that measure would kind of be foolhardy on our part. So until somebody summarily dismisses that initiative, I think we still have to err on the side of caution.
So at this time, there are no plans to rescind the furlough notifications? Okay.
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Senator Lee had a question, and Senator Nelson, and then the OPA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I apologize for kind of hijacking the agenda, but I just wanted to go back very quickly to something that we were discussing earlier about mandatory electronic filing. And I know that's not the first time that this has come up. It's come up in many times when we were in Committee of the Whole and in other meetings. And I thank Madam OPA and for Mr. Camacho for raising it. And so I've been thinking about it a little bit. I've had some conversations with business leaders and other folks in the community who would be impacted by something like this. And one of the concerns that they had is they just want to make sure that we give businesses enough time to comply. If we make that change, that we provide proper notice to them. And then also, it was also brought to my attention that maybe some of these small mom and pop stores, they prefer having those hard copies. And I know the speaker has also made mention of this. They want to be able to, some people want to be able to go into Department of Revenue and Tax. They want to get their paper stamped so it's certified, and then they have those records that they keep. Some people still don't trust filing everything electronically, and we understand that. So my question to you would be, is DRT okay with maybe setting up a kiosk at the department where businesses or individuals can go and get help to file electronically in the first few weeks or a few months of this program as we roll out, and have their documents printed out and you can stamp it, and then that kind of would solve that problem? So if you could answer that.
Yes, we do have a kiosk room right now, currently. We've been talking about that throughout the years, even actually go one-to-one basis with some of the people that want to learn how to file online. But just for the information, we had this online filing for about maybe over 10 years, and at least 1/3 of the business are actually utilizing the online filing. So we're willing to do whatever it takes to try and with some exemptions maybe that we can look at. But I mean, most businesses out there, it's there, and maybe like the public auditor mentioned, it's the online payment that we need to actually make it more attractive to basically have the businesses pay online, rather than a lot of them right now are filing it online, printing their return and going to Treasurer of Guam or to our department to actually make the payment. So we're amendable to anything that we can do to make it possible, and at the same time we can eliminate those man hours that we actually process every day for how many years for these people that are actually doing it manually.
Thank you, Mr. Camacho. And then also the message was received from the OPA about perhaps creating a limit to paying online so that we wouldn't have to absorb really large credit card fees. So that's Chapter 26 of Title 11, it's subsection 26110.1, and that's electronic filing of monthly returns is allowed, but we would be changing it to required. And then maybe we can have a discussion offline about potential exemptions or things like that.
And possibly also your effective date. I would prefer that you have it no later than September 30th will be the end. In other words, beginning October 1st. Because you have 180 days from, and depending on your hearing and everything else, if passage happens like April or May, 180 days is beyond October 1. So to make it effective no later than October 1. And thank you very much for that measure. I'm sure that Revenue and Tax welcomes it.
And we can also try and amend that particular section to include all returns, not only BPT, but alcohol and tobacco. Also, basically, if we have this sales tax that's going to come up, we can put it in there, and all the others that are currently being filed. So we can start working with our IT people to include those other forms. Even the banking and financial institution, which is filed yearly, we can have it in there. So those are things that we're trying to do to make it more convenient, more and easier for the government, moving forward. So, but for your information, also we're working, Senator, with our vendor to make it available for landowners on Guam actually to go online to our website, print their billing for whatever particular year that they're going to pay. It should be able to compute the interest and penalties, and those are the things that we're doing, and it should be available very soon. So those are the things that we're doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Camacho. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I may, Senator, if you don't mind, since we're talking about the electronic filing, I guess there's a couple things. One of the things that was mentioned during all the special sessions was that I think the public auditor brought it up also, the whole ability or inability for scanning, right? And so I just want to understand, if you set up a kiosk, you know, if somebody comes in, right, with their paper, their hard copy, is there a possibility for them just go ahead and put it in a scanner? And so the question is, why don't we have a scanner?
We, you know, just to go back, just to go back in time, once upon a time, many years back, we do have a gigantic scanner that we have that does those things to read numbers but it was too costly and basically managing it and the maintenance, you know, we did it for a few years. We scan all our tax documents and all the requirements that are actually filed with the Department of Reorganization, and we have them in our system. But moving forward from that time, it required a lot of maintenance, and so we're moving forward, you know, the e-filings now, you know, in other words.
Right. Oh, I mean, but to be able to complement the e-filing, you know, because there might still be some people, and I do know a lot of smaller business people who don't have that capability to file it online, or just afraid of, you know, of going online and filing online that way. And
Yes.
so there's got to be, I think, a more holistic approach to include all technologies and all avenues to be able to file and pay.
Yes,
You know?
we're currently scanning, so I think that that is something that might be very possible. So we can also incorporate that, scanning and filing electronically.
And what are we talking about in terms of costs?
That was going to be the other thing I wanted to add in the bill. Whatever bill comes out is, please consider funding.
Well, what is it?
We need to talk to the vendor first and see how much that was. I wouldn't know right now.
Senator, if I just may, part of the challenge here is we're dealing with a system that dates back to the 1980s. That's over 30 years, and what happened was the private contractor developed a system. I think it was in excess of $3 or $4 million. It really did not work. The line, you know, when you scan things, it's supposed to go to the records. So building a scanner on an antiquated system was just asking for challenges, and they scrapped it. And our audit report showed that.
Right.
You know, it was at least that scanner, $3 or $4 million as a minimum was spent, and it just did not work because you're building, trying to make a sophisticated system on an antiquated system.
Right.
And what DOA and DRT needs is a new financial management system, because we're dealing with a relic. That dates back to the 1980s.
Right.
I'm a relic too.
And I believe we all can agree to that. I guess, I mean, not to you being a relic, but I mean that the equipment that Reverend Tax needs to be updated. But again, here we are. We're now in a whole new century. The technological advances are moving so fast. You would imagine there are many other jurisdictions who have something like this.
Yes.
And so the question then begs, are you working with the Office of Technology as opposed to just dealing directly with a vendor? Because again, if we're dealing directly with a vendor that is not really working with DOA so that the systems can talk, then we're going to end up in the same place that we have been.
Yes, we are working with Frank Lohan, and basically, you know, since we're talking about online filing, why don't we just add in also the income tax? You know, it's really it's available. 1040 EG is available, but we just need to add the other forms in 1040A, 1040. That's a lot of man hours that we process every day. So, I mean, we can blanket all these returns, come up with a proposed from Frank Lohan and the IT people, what it would cost to actually get this thing online and eliminate a lot of these manual processing. So this is really something that we need to do.
And I can appreciate that, but there's got to be that transition period from the relics, right, who perhaps aren't as familiar with going ahead and filing online, and we're even talking income tax returns. And again, we're talking about the security of that information. So it just seems to behoove us to, you know, we can talk about all these great ideas, but there's got to be that transition phase and that educational phase, so that, because by the time, again, it might take a whole decade before everybody starts, is very familiar with the process. We're not going to jump in this and all of a sudden, otherwise I believe we're going to lose people, in terms of them filing and us not accepting, or revenue tax not accepting the hard copy, and submittal. So that has got to be included in the plan, and I guess that's why I bring up the Office of Technology, is to make sure, right, that in the end we do have a system within the government that talks to each other. And maybe it's not just revenue tax and DOA, but I'm sure there's a lot of information in public health that needs to be kind of cross-communicated with DOA and revenue tax and whatnot. And again, I just wanted to at least go down this road in this dialogue, because we were talking about electronic filing, but it's not an overnight sensation, right? There is going to be a learning curve, and there's going to be a transition time, and I believe it's going to take at least a decade before we can really feel comfortable that the majority, if not all of the returns, and we're not just talking BPT anymore now, we're talking, individual tax returns, we're talking, whatever, right? And so I just needed to at least bring it up just to make sure we're all on the same page of where we're going to go with this electronic, because even if we do file a bill or put a bill in and pass the bill, that it's mandatory, right? Again, I believe that might not be practicable at this time.
Yes, we talk about all these great ideas, but really it's funding. That has always been our issue. We can upgrade our system. Again, it's funding. We're going to need money to upgrade.
Then let me just ask that, right? We always talk about funding, and we've gone down this road so many times, and the OPA has spoken to it many, many times, right? What's the ballpark? What's the ballpark? I mean, if we're really talking about working with vendors, at least 10 million. And again, that seems like a nominal amount compared to the efficiencies that can be created, as well as the collections that can be had.
Yes, it all depends. Again, do we want a new system? Do we want to improve the system? That's the conversation that we need to have with the agencies. So that, it might be as high as 40 million for the whole system. Then to implement would take at least 5 years if it's a new system.
Right. So, and again, you're not the only ones, because, we got the report out of GMH as well, right? They need a whole new system. And again, we're just, like the speaker said, we're just not talking to each other.
And on that note, since you're here, Mr. Director of DOA, I sent a letter and I followed up with you about potential Department of Interior federal funding for a study that could help us move out of the AS400. And so I just wanted to see if you had an update for us on that score.
Yeah, Senator, yes. But before that, I would like to say, I would certainly offer my wholehearted support to whatever initiative we have for going paperless and online filing and online reporting and online payments. I date back to the 1980s and before, but I readily see the advantage of doing that. To answer your specific question, Senator, yes, we have. We've recently sent a letter to DOI regarding funding for a system to support our fixed asset reporting, which was the subject of a finding government-wide. So we've requested support for a system to improve that reporting system, to deal with the finding, and also to get better reports for ourselves.
And they haven't responded, or what's the timeline to hear back? And
we sent it last week, so I expect a response sometime probably in 3 weeks. And there's also an island financial conference in about 4 weeks, and I will follow it up then if I don't get a response.
If I may, we actually had about a year ago a visit from a contractor from the Department of Interior who met with us and DOA and Revenue Tax about a new financial management system. So the groundwork has been laid, and I think she actually is, the ball's in their court, because she was putting together a report to be able to, get all the proper justification to, again, assist us. So that is something that we did meet with at their request, I think it's about a year ago. So it's a response is certainly due.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Chairman. I'm just very curious that we got 3047 public law and the reorganization. I'm just curious, is there anything going on in reorganization? The Speaker brought up, the Chairman, that help revenue and tax. Senator Brooks brought up, the two are not talking. Is it because you're collecting money at Treasurer and there's collecting money at Treasurer but it's not feeding revenue and tax so they can feed you all the data? Maybe that's part of that reorganization needs to happen. And then when we want to talk about money and the system they're talking about that revenue and tax uses, when my colleague starts talking about security, you need to understand that revenue and tax falls under the IRS umbrella of security. So if they have a system there, they can't just ask Mr. Frank Lawn, come bring a new system and it will work. It doesn't work that way. Mr. Lawn needs to talk to revenue and tax and IRS. It's not that easy. If you want to set up the kiosk, everything's available. And if we go back to revenue and tax, what is the cost? What is the dollar figure? You still got to work, and the governor's office still needs to work about the $30 million reduction somewhere. I don't know how you, thank you, Mr. Lester, for thanking us, but I think we need to all sit down and start talking about how everybody can share the wealth. Because revenue and tax, you needed 36 people. If there's folks out there that the government's looking at reorganization, maybe they can fill the driver's license section. Maybe we can open another satellite for driver's license. Then we can bring in more money. And maybe Treasurer Guam needs to be merged with revenue and tax, because that's where all the money's at. There's not, I don't think you're getting a lot of money other than GPD, or very few agencies go through Treasurer Guam, other than paying everything else that revenue and tax records. So I'm just very curious, is that we all like to see things, and as long as we see an audit report saying it's costing us $4 million on credit cards, something's got to give. And if we're all going to just keep waiting for somebody to say something, I think it's BMR and DOA needs to say we need to lift the restriction. Sure, there needs to be a limit. I mean, how many businesses out there are going to be paying $10 million that you worry about that expense? I think if you talk to the business, they're going to pay a lot less. They'll do it throughout the year. But I'm just very curious. You know, all the tools are there, but all we're looking at really right now is just surviving today, and we shouldn't be doing that. We should be looking at what we're going to do tomorrow. And that's why that reorganization is very important. And I'm looking forward to sitting with you, with Senator Elgin and the Speaker, and looking at what reorganization the governor's willing to take a look at. I know Lester's like, not yet. Let's just get settled first. And I agree with him. We need to get settled. Get the dust. Nobody offer any more changes before we get to October. That's the key. But there are hearings coming up. We're going to take a look at the possible exemption and stuff. But it's all about the people of Guam and the agencies coming out and testifying for or against. You need to speak out, because if you don't speak up on the hearings, when we move forward, my colleagues are going to say, well, you didn't speak. You had your shot. And we'll move on it. All right? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Snarkstein. Actually, that's probably one of the best suggestions that's come out this morning. Moving the accounts collection and the treasurer to revenue and taxation. Because when you go up to DRT, they are there. They have their own little section, and their computer, unfortunately, goes straight out someplace else, but not upstairs or anywhere else in the building to talk. But if you guys were all part of the same department, I mean, that division was all part of the same department, maybe there might be more exchange of information that would help out. And I really do wish that all of us just need to be forthright in our communications and in our statements to each other, okay? When I earlier joked about the fact that Fire is going around touting that the 23 days saved them 400,000. may, I don't know, somebody's got to check that. But anyway, but then this morning's paper had the report of Department of Administration, Government of Guam returning $31 million in federal money. It's not that I don't try to find out how much is being returned. You may have, did they all get copies? Oh, make sure. Anyway, I'll have circulated right now. Did they get that? Anyway, Department of Agriculture, when you gave your report last week, the audit about them losing several $million in federal funds, I came into the office and I was like, how is that possible? How is that possible that they returned? Well, I FOIA'd them. I sent a letter asking them, and this is the response that I got. 3 pages of charts that said it's 100% reimbursed and we can get an extension. How was I supposed to know from that report that they were going to be losing $4 million? I'm showing it to the OP, but I think I thought it was supposed to have been ready for everybody to, because I need everybody to be forthright, and I'm not sure if I should be writing to the Department of Administration and saying, how much do you show, or do I write to the clearinghouse? I started this 10 years ago of asking for the reports of how much was left in that power of Adelup to get them to be spending their money. How are we supposed to know? Is it Department of Agriculture Administration that signs the check returning all this cash? How is anybody supposed to know how much we're losing on an annual basis? It wasn't until I read this morning's paper that I realized that we lost $12 million the previous year and $30 million this last year. But I can show you, I have stacks and stacks from the last 10 years of FOIA responses from all the agencies asking them what's the status of their federal grants and how.
Just add one more to the overall challenge that the government of Guam faces, and that is the Medicaid money. There's, I don't have my iPad with me. Unfortunately, I've misplaced it, so I don't have my notes. I had a very long conversation with Tess Archangel because I think at the last 2 meetings or so, we mentioned about the money that's sitting right now in Medicaid. The good news, the funding went from a 50-50 match to a 55-40 match, for a 5% increase overall. But this is, they call it ACA, the Obama, and GovGuam got a significant share back in, I want to, when the Affordable Care Act was, right now it's over $100 million that we're waiting to match. We're waiting to match for GovGuam, which will expire in FY 2019. Okay, $100 million. That's a significant amount that GovGuam has to find to match, the 100 million is the match portion of 55%. So you almost need another 100 million to...
No, it's actually better than that. It's 91, isn't it?
No, that's for the children, that portion. But overall, we're getting a significant amount for the child care portion. But overall, we still have over $100 million in Medicaid funding. That's 55%. We need almost another $90 million to be able to utilize that money. So where are we going to find $90 million on top of the $30 million shortfall that we're experiencing right now? I mean, we are in a crisis situation.
No, I understand that. And part of the thing, as I understand it, at least in our discussion with Tess Archangel, was the fact that she couldn't process them fast enough. that she needs additional people?
Well, not when I talked to her about 2 weeks ago. No, she said it's there, and they submitted in. They're waiting for Department of Administration to.
That's why the amount that goes to the department, to GMH, though they complain about the fact that the amount that goes to them from the government of Guam might only say 3 million or 8 million. The rest of it, we have Senator Rodriguez had the good sense to redirect it, and it goes as matching so that you can pay the hospital, so we can make that change. We're trying everything that we can to find other ways that we can multiply the money and take advantage of the federal funds that are there. Mr. Burns.
Mr. Speaker, that 31 million was an early number that was released in December. It really overstates the issue, and some things were counted twice. When I looked at the number yesterday, and I haven't done a thorough investigation, it was more like 2.5 million, not 31 million, and relates, as the OPA just said, relates to annual Medicaid funding. And it's not actually entirely the 119 million that's out there. It's annual Medicaid funding for that's available for specific projects, which, if not completed, the funding is not used.
I got the impression that the number came from Guam, because when I looked at the booklet, at least online, it had the picture of your person in charge of that division, her photograph at the meeting.
Yes.
Was I wrong?
No, sir, you're absolutely right. When I got hold of the same thing, I took the picture up to her office and said, "It's your picture on the front here." But it was an early number, and it was an error. So we
well, someone had better correct that. Because let me tell you, my poor staff suffered this morning because I came in screaming about how we could lose $31 million. And how I'm supposed to, I don't even use the word discern, because from that report, you couldn't discern how much was going to be going back. You would have to divine it, because there was no way that I could possibly read that and tell you that, oh, it looked like there was 4 million or 7 million going back to the feds. And
my staff is working on it too, so we share your pain.
I met with some people from the federal grantor maybe about 5 months ago. And there was some concern that was raised about the lack of availing themselves to the grant money. There was a commitment for a more focused attempt to ensure that the federal funds available primarily for their conservation efforts, because there were conservation officers in the room at the time. But the immediate agreement, and it's noted here in the response, was that the extension could be granted. So we didn't lose the money. As a matter of fact, I think this report, as very succinct as it is, it does basically say that, for the most part, can be extended. So the monies are available. They weren't quote unquote lost. I agree with you that there should be a correction made to the news story. But this collaboration with the federal grantor agency continues in a positive way. But the point being that we do need to avail ourselves to resources outside of the government of Guam whenever necessary to be able to meet our collective missions, and we'll work on that.
Okay. Is there anything that more that we can do? We can get this Vice Speaker's bill through for the short-term rental. Is there, Senator Lee is asking about how she can help in another piece of legislation on mandatory filing. Do you want to would you also provide her office with how much it would cost on the POS, so that we can get that legislation out?
Yes, like the Senator, Director Burns was saying earlier, we're meeting and discussing, between DOA and DRT on these issues. We'll add on the online filing to this meeting, so we'll try and work with the Senator, and then we can basically come up with some amounts that we can look at.
Okay, and Mr. Carlson, at one of the earlier SES meetings, you presented a list of possible revenue enhancements that we could possibly. You saw that somebody did Senator Lee did the manpower. Yeah. So, and some of the others, if you could even give us drafts. As you saw yesterday, I'm willing to be out there. Just send me what it is that you think we should be doing on some of those other areas. Any way that we can, because as I keep trying to explain to everybody, if we can get it from the sin taxes, then we can reduce the sales tax maybe to 1% and have the sin taxes cover the additional 1%. I know you keep insisting that 1%, whether it's sales tax or VPT, has to stay in place to keep us above water. And I understand that. But at some point, we're also going to need to get Rev and Taxes assistance to do all the collections that they need so that we might be able to obviate the need for that 1%, that other 1%. Because now you have me concerned with your 3 reports about
Let me just make a caution, because I had a chance to talk to Jay Rojas. Guam right now is on a negative watch on the bonds, and until we stabilize, I think the passage of the 2% and the 5%, the 2% to go in effect to offset the 1% in the GPT, because there are so many different exemptions already that we're seeing. And so by reducing it down to 1%, it's not going to make up the difference on the 1% increase in BBT. And until we can stabilize and we have the information, Guam is still going to continue to be on a negative watch. So we don't even know for sure after all the exemptions are calculated if it's going to be equivalent, is a 2% sales tax, likely a 2% sales tax will offset a 1% increase in BPT, likely. But if we continue to exempt and then reduce, it's not going to offset. And that's going to be the critical thing for us to consider, because we need a minimum of that on a full year, that's $60 million. That's the minimum we need to hold.
Well, I'm not really crying about the fact that our credit rating is down. Because I don't because I just don't want them to. I don't want them coming in and asking to borrow more money, because it's going to be so expensive, And so I'm sorry that I'm not as sympathetic about the fact that the credit rating is down, because I don't want to consider any additional borrowing. And maybe that might be the way that it makes it so expensive that it's not.
Yeah, I want to make 2 points. One is getting the free federal money, the reimbursement, is very important. So when the cash is available, either through bonds or when Section 30 money comes in and cash is available, or perhaps legislative authorization to use cash that's available in special funds, should be made available to as soon as possible get the reimbursement, rather than waiting a year for an extension to pump the money in the economy. If you make the cash available, to get reimbursement for Medicare and whatever other reimbursables, then you'll get at least half of that money back or 90% back. And then, so you don't have to come up with the full amount for the reimbursement up front. If you put out 50 million and you get 25 million back, then you can use that 25 million to get another 12.5 million. And so you need to prime the pump. I would prioritize to make sure cash is available for those reimbursements so we don't lose them. Another obstacle with the federal funds is that it's very time consuming. I think the public auditor mentioned it takes average of 4 months to get a purchase order out of GSA. This makes it very difficult to spend federal funds, especially if you have a fiscal year funds that the grants expire. That process needs to be expedited. Also in the AS400, there's a tracking system. You can just push a function key and see the % of expenditures for the grant. So it's easy to see on a fiscal year basis, that doesn't work on the multiple year, what the tracking is. So if you're halfway through the year, it tells you what % of the funds you've spent. So that tool is built into the system.
And I'm hoping this is getting back to, Lester, if you can take the message, I'm sure Adeloop's watching. So please, we've got, and GSA's under you. So you've got to understand that GSA's got to assist in moving forward, because I can tell you that I have had people, agency heads come and talk to me about the possibility of doing their own procurement as the way to do things. And you've got to also get your HR division to move a little faster, because, you know, GPD didn't realize their admission in their letter to me that, you know, that when I provided them 1.2 million 4 years ago, and they've only been able to pick up 16 people because of the loss of time in trying to get a certified listing, and then people dropping out and whatever other things. There are other agencies that are coming in asking, how about if we have our own HR? And I thought we were trying to consolidate, but if you can't get your divisions to move these things, and we're losing federal funds, or we're losing the inability to hire people in a timely fashion, then unfortunately we're going to decentralize again, and then we'll, you know, and I just hope that Adeloop is going to be the one that's going to jump all over all the rest of these to do the things that needs to be done to get these things to move a little faster. That's what I'm hoping for, okay? And as a final note, I hope that it was an oversight and not purposeful. But for the first time in a decade, when the budgets for 2019 were submitted, we only got we got not even PDFs. We got copies of PDFs, and we didn't get the Excel sheets. We used to get the Excel sheets for every department for the last 10 years, and now we're getting copies of the PDF, which make it impossible. I didn't realize you can take a PDF and my staff would go through, and in an hour go through the staffing pattern of the hospital, because when I chided you last summer about doctors that were still on there that I knew weren't working, that he was able to, within an hour, break it down and have everybody, though the way that you guys used to have it at the hospital, it's great. It's so impossible. You're lost by page 12, and it's 24 pages, to go through the staffing pattern to try to figure out why is this over on why aren't they all together? So he was able to get me everybody broken down. We just got to be forthright. I won't use another word, just a little more forthright in sharing information and realizing that we are Team Guam. And the only way we're going to stay afloat is if we keep swimming together. Please.
The only thing that I directed specifically was not to transmit paper to alleviate cost, and we'll work on the request.
Thank you. Because if we can get the information, I have brilliant staff at OFB. They can go through all kinds of stuff, and I'm amazed. I scream at 6:30 in the morning, and by 9:30 I come in and I've got it on one page. So please just get us the information, and we will try to help. Some of the other things that you'd like on your 11-point list, let's talk about, okay? And maybe we should end on a good note and have our friend from GVB tell us how wonderful we're doing, so that we don't think that
that's a lot of pressure.
All is bad in.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. Looking at the visitor industry, I do have some good news, and I do have some challenges that I do want to bring up to everybody. The good news is we are right on track. Back in September, before the fiscal year started, we did our internal projection with the research team, with management, and based on market trends and seat capacity, we came up with a number that we'd finish fiscal year 2018 at 1.44 million visitors. This is a negative 7.8% as compared to 2017. But we've got to remember 2017 was a banner year, our best year fiscally. So, so coming off of that, with the news of Delta pulling out and all the seat reduction, we landed at this projection of negative 7.8. So the good news is we're right on track. The bad news is, or the challenge is, we're right on track to finish at that number. So now that I have up to March 28th, for the month of March, we're down negative 5.4 as compared to last year. March is usually our peak season. March and August are the two big months for visitor arrivals. I do want to note, though, that we have had some progress with the Japan market. And March is the first time in a while where Japan is our top primary country again for visitor arrivals. And that is due largely in part to charter flights that we scheduled for this particular peak season. We had over 40 charter flights this month with a seat capacity of about 90% for the Japan visitors. So they beat Korea for March. However, Korea's growth has been so amazing over the past 5 years that we've reached that tipping point where their growth can no longer hold up the drop in other markets. So we do have a lot of challenges. It's no secret that North Korea, the true effects of North Korea can be realized in FY 2018 as compared to the end of FY 2017. So now we're seeing those effects, and we're doing our best to bring in more charter flights from Japan. We are seeing a lot of interest, but of course rising cost is another challenge for us for the island. It's turning visitors to other beach resorts and other competition for us. So right now we are still on track to finish the year about 1.4 million tourists as compared to the 156 we did in 2017. But yeah, we're still pushing through for the industry. And questions?
You're supposed to have us hi.
I'm sorry? What was that?
I thought you were supposed to give me good news.
I know. That's why I said there's a lot of pressure, because you put me at the end. So the good news is we're right on track, so it's nothing that's surprising anybody.
Okay. Senator Espaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, this is not related to GVB, but if I could just backtrack
Sure.
to bring up another issue with revenue tax. It was discussed during all the special sessions, the whole issue about tax amnesty. Is that or is that not going to be pursued?
I believe we're looking at it right now, but I think one of the comments that I made earlier is the taxpayers out there that are paying timely and, paying your taxes timely is something that we're looking at. So at the same time, we are still looking at other programs to bring in those receivables, those taxes. So we're looking at other programs. If like IRS has other programs to try. I don't know if you hear those advertisements that are out there, where if you owe the IRS 10,000 or more, you can look into these things. So we're looking at other programs to try and aggressively try to bring those taxes in. So at the same time, so
Mr. Camacho, I appreciate it, but I have to at least disagree with that perspective that it wouldn't be fair to those who pay on time. I mean, perhaps so, but this is a time when we need cash infusion. If somebody owes us money and it's been hanging out there, and perhaps they can't come pay now because the interest and the penalties have accumulated to the point where it's just almost they're drowning and they view it as an impossible task. This might be that avenue where you could actually say, okay, we will forego the interest and the penalty, just come in and pay us what you owe us. And it falls in line with what you just said in terms of looking at other programs, right, that's being offered right now by the IRS. We're seeing it on TV. We hear it on the radios. If you owe the U.S. government or IRS $10,000 or more, we could probably waive this and we could probably get you to pay nothing type thing. That's the same line as tax amnesty, right? So I would ask you to at least reconsider that position. I mean, that's something that could be implemented right away, and we know we've done it before off a $100 million debt, or that people owed the government. I think the last time we did it, and I believe you stated it, the success of that was about in line with what the average is, right? The 20/80 rule. Out of the $100 million that was owed, I think we collected about 20 million. 20 million is still 20 million in a very short time, within a 6-month period. So I'm going to ask you again to reconsider that position, right? Take a serious look, because it doesn't need any legislation. It just takes you to say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to implement a tax amnesty for the next 6 months. You owe us money, come pay it, we'll waive the penalties. And if the interest is waivable, then we'll waive that too. But reconsider, Mr. Camacho, please.
Yes, we'll look into it again. And like you said, there's a lot of programs out there, and even currently, there's a lot of programs that taxpayers can avail themselves to do offer and compromise. In other words, those are the things that we have, things that are available for the taxpayers. But we'll sit as a team with and look into it one more time, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I think the difference between a tax amnesty and maybe all the programs is that once you announce it and it becomes the headlines in the paper, then everybody's aware of it. Nobody's aware of all the programs. And in fact, people are even scared to come into revenue tax if they owe you an amount well over what they initially owed you. Because once you add on the tax and the interest and everything else, all of a sudden that $2,000 that they owe you now becomes $5,000. And then they're like, I can't go in and show face. But if it's announced that, a blanket announcement, there's an amnesty. You got 6 months to come in. You come in within that period of time, we will probably waive your fees. And again, please reconsider that position. We need to bring in the cash.
Yep.
Thank you.
Like I said, we'll look into.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Espadon, for reminding me. I got a call from a tax accountant this morning suggesting the tax amnesty. And if you would please, and I'll direct it to you to take it to Adelup, because the tax commissioner is not Mr. Camacho, the tax commissioner is the governor. And to take to Adelup the fact that I was told this morning that if there were an amnesty was announced, and even if you don't take the 6 months, I mean, if you just say 60 days and the interest and fees are going to be waived, just pay your principal, that even people that are now on payment plans would go to the bank and borrow money to pay that off, because the interest would be less than the penalties that you're getting. And if you want to stabilize, that's the way to do it. That he figures it would be about $20 million that could be immediately received before the end of this fiscal year. So I ask you to please take it to the tax commissioner himself that this has to be reconsidered. And to go back to another point that I keep trying to explain to Rev and Tax, is that the tax stamp was not just for control. When I had been thinking about tax stamp for several years, and thankfully Senator Nicholas found the time to sit down with some people to talk about it. But we did some analysis, and we went through the cigarette tax collections, and we noticed that the month that the Tax Stamp Act was introduced, not even passed, just introduced, collections for cigarette taxes went up $500,000 a month. $500,000 a month. And if we had the stamp in, how much more could we possibly get? But just the fear of them being caught, they started to come in because they didn't want it shown that how come, since when all of a sudden you're selling $2 million worth of cigarettes. It was the fear of this finally having some kind of control. And so that was the reason why the Cigarette Tax Stamp Act was passed. So please, we've got to get that done as soon as possible. Don't stop considering it and thinking about it. It's got to be implemented. It's 10 months now, yes. And it's unconscionable that it hasn't been.
Yeah, like I said earlier, we're meeting with all the stakeholders April 10, so we're going to start the process and identify funding for the machines and all, the responsibility that and possibly again we probably need more staff just to get this thing going. So we're meeting again on April 10th, and we'll see what we can do to move it forward. In other words, expedite the process. In other words,
I didn't realize that I had colleagues sitting up behind me, and there's a question from Senator Torres.
Yes, I had a question for GVB. In one of our prior meetings, there was some discussion by Ms. Benito at DRT with regard to the bed and breakfast industry, and how one of the comments she made was, if you can help me, identify where I can look to these establishments, and it'll help in their enforcement. But to GVB, though, I believe you have a tool right now in the customs and declaration forms that every passenger fills out when they arrive on Guam. And I believe that also contains information of where you are staying, either hotel or if you're a resident, what your residence is. Does GVB presently do a compilation of that information to help also reconcile with the hotel occupancy taxes? How much of our visiting population is staying at the hotels and what other population is staying otherwise? Because I believe that would be one avenue where, if they're doing it under penalty of perjury, or if it's a declaration of a true statement, then perhaps the information is there for us to start.
Yes, we currently do. We actually, with this whole transition to the new custom form, the smaller version that we introduced in December, we have a lot more power to do more analytics in terms of the percentage of where they're staying, hotel versus bed and breakfast versus timeshare, things like that. We do track. It may be a little harder. We don't necessarily ask them where exactly to break it down even further, but we do have the exit surveys that take more of a sample size of each market to determine hotels they're staying at, if it is bed and breakfast. But that number is still very nominal or minimal at this point. But we do have that information December going forward, so I definitely can share with Rev and Tax, and we can definitely meet. I'd be happy to meet. So I do also want to say that we have a lot of experience with scanners, high volume scanners. This is what we do to collect our data right now. We do over 4,000 a day, 4,000 forms a day, about 120,000 a month, and 1.5 million a year. So the volume in 5 different languages. So I do have some experience, and I'd be happy to talk with Rev and Tax or set up a separate meeting to discuss that further. Yeah.
Because I think if anything, that'll give us
Detail them to your department.
Yeah, but that'll also give us an indication if there are legitimate establishments out there, and if if they're being identified, as opposed to just needing to maybe hone in and
yeah, and
more.
I do have to commend Rev and Tax. I've worked with their business licensing branch, and they've given me kind of a comprehensive list that I've been weeding through just to see how many licensed bed and breakfasts there are. Just a mechanism that we can see, and you kind of get a better feel of who's out there and where they're staying at. But we do, I think it was about 16 bed and breakfasts we have registered, something like that. But yeah, they've given us that information. We've been trying to weed through it and see exactly.
And that's the thing, there's a lot of information. And I know one of the suggestions that Mr. Shimizu gave yesterday was to have somebody posted at a revenue agent posted at the airport for the use tax. But maybe it's my fear of the police and, the newspaper saying that I lied in my forms. When I go through, I detail everything that I buy on that list, and you're not supposed, because I would come through that line and I'd probably be sweaty if I didn't put everything down. So, but that list can and should be used for I thought was supposed to be for the use tax. And so is that shared?
No, just for clarification purposes, I think at the airport, if you bring in anything in a luggage or box, I think it's exempt from the use tax. So that's been exempted for a long time. So it's in the exemption. So you bring in your luggage, you bring something in, you declare it, but for purpose of tax, it's exempt.
Maybe that's our assignment for the next SES. Of all the exemptions that are currently in statute, which one should we address and repeal?
Our audit on GRT did talk about it, and of course the #1 exemption on BPT is wholesale, but there are others that we did identify earlier, like, I hate to say this, but the Dave Santos Act is one of them. Again, how do you eat this elephant? One bite at a time. Start getting rid of the smaller exemptions, over time. And that's how we're going to increase the revenues. There are a number of exemptions in liquid fuel. There's another other word. And that was a request from Senator Rodriguez to start looking at all the exemptions. And we had a hard time just trying to quantify the GRT exemptions.
No, but I think if we can start, I know we were talking earlier and trying to figure out whether or not we continue to have these SES meetings, but really seriously, I think the exchange is good. And so if we can talk about exemptions, and if it can come from here to us as a body, then we can at least fall back on it and say that this was an SES suggestion that this tax be taken up. This is an SES suggestion that this exemption be repealed. Let's start talking about it, because I was at a function the other day and somebody came up to me and he goes, your property tax is a good idea, increase is a good idea. He said, but you should get rid of the senior exemption.
That's I was just going to say that. Yeah, right now it's at 55. The common age for Manumco is 65, or to get rid of it temporarily for a while. Right now, that exemption alone would just be $3 million. Then, of course, the other one is the homeowner's exemption. That would be another $3 million.
Well, I mean, but the thing was, this gentleman actually, he said he thought it was great. He pays he talked about the home that he has in the States and how much he pays on that in the thousands. And he said, mine here, I pay $160. And they were gracious enough to ask him if he wanted to make payments in two installments on that, unless anybody else wants. No, really seriously, can we think about exemptions? And I'll have my OFB, your staff compile all the exemptions that we think we, yeah, no, but I mean, but some of the others, and let's start seriously talking about it. Sure, you know. Somebody at the market last night, whose name I won't mention, came up to me and said, "Hey, good legislation you're introducing. Just because you're leaving, you don't have to worry about re-election, huh?" So anyway, on that note, unless anybody wants to, we will recess at the call of the chair. Or maybe, no, let's give a date. All right, 2 weeks. And if we don't, we'll call you. Okay? Thanks. But exemptions, think about the ones that we've got. Okay, thank you. And amnesty, please.